Well, it's Friday and the weather is pretty crappy, but in spite of that, I decided to take class outside, as it were, and just take a few minutes to comment on some of your excellent work in the discussion boards, and also say a little bit thereby about human dignity and virtue ethics, which I mentioned a couple times in my responses to discussion boards. So, as you can see, it's Friday and we're still experiencing cloudiness here, but not so much rain. So anyway, as I was looking through, we'll talk about first the discussion of human dignity. As I was looking through your answers about human dignity, which I thought were excellent, a couple of really good points there. And one thing I will say is that many of you pointed out that the idea of treating everybody with dignity is a pretty important part of professional ethics in the healthcare field, and that's absolutely true. And it illustrates a pretty important point, I think, which is that you don't have to be a Christian or even a believer in God to believe that all people should be treated with dignity. So the ground or basis for that in Christianity, which we're going to talk about a lot in this class, is creation, grace, redemption. That those are the sort of the things that a Christian believes that produce this idea that all people should be treated with dignity. But you could be a Buddhist and believe that people should be treated with dignity because all people are capable of achieving enlightenment, or because all people are inherently connected, right? You could be a Hindu and believe that all people should be treated with dignity because all people carry a divine spark or a part of the divine inside of them. You could be an atheist and believe that all people should be treated with dignity because it's simply rational to treat all people with dignity, perhaps because you want to be treated with dignity at some point, right? So one thing I've learned about ethics is that we can often agree about principles without necessarily agreeing about the foundations of those principles, right? So I can say that it's good to be generous to people, and a Christian justification for that might be because God is generous with us, but another justification might be that it makes you feel good to be generous. So I like the comments on the human dignity thing, and a lot of you really highlighted those various ways of thinking about dignity. The other thing I want to say, just by way of summarizing some of my comments on your discussion boards, is in talking about the car in the parking lot, most of you really hit what I think are the sort of factors that would go into the decision making here. By that I mean that everybody is making decisions thinking about consequences, also thinking about rules, and also thinking about virtue, right? I mentioned the idea of virtue ethics in those discussion boards and some of my responses. What I mean by virtue ethics is that thinking about ethics as trying to do the thing that will make you a better person, or trying to do the thing that the better person would do. So if you approach that problem and said, I don't want to be that guy or that gal. I don't want to be the person who pulls away. I want to be the person who's honest and upright and tells the person what I've done, even if I can't pay for it. That is what I would call a sort of virtue ethics line of reasoning. The question you're asking yourself is not necessarily what is the best outcome I can achieve here, that would be consequentialism, or asking yourself what rule am I supposed to follow here, that would be deontology, but asking yourself what kind of person do I want to be, right? And if that's the question that you ask yourself first, then virtue ethics, what I would call virtue ethics, would be an important part of your moral reasoning. But I think most of us do this moral reasoning in a sort of mixed way. I suggested in one of my replies to one of your comments that if I had changed the parameters of that problem and said that you were a single parent with low income and you were supporting 2 children and you didn't have good insurance and you wouldn't have been able to afford the deductible, I can say that a person in that situation might have a moral obligation to think about the well-being of their children, especially if we're just talking about a scratch in the paint of a car, right? So I think that taking into account the outcomes of your actions is a pretty significant part of your moral calculus, or it should be. Then many of us are not in a position to say that we have the resources to just say, we don't need to worry about that. So I thought it was really interesting that I would say all of you really accounted for those 3 methods of moral reasoning, right? The ones that are covered in the text are consequentialism, that is, looking for good outcomes, which is also called utilitarianism in the text, and deontology, which is following rules. But even in the text, the author says, and in the PowerPoint you might have observed that I talked about how for most people, there's a sort of mix of rules and consequences in their moral reasoning. And I'd say for a lot of people, this idea of virtue ethics, and it seemed to be the case for really all of you, this idea of virtue ethics plays in as well, is asking yourself, what kind of person do I want to be? What is the action that I can do here that's going to help me to be the person I want to be? So anyway, that was just a quick and dirty way to comment on some of the discussion boards. It seems more personal than just typing this over and over again. Hope everybody has a good weekend. As always, email me if you have any questions. Let's hope we see better weather soon.